Good morning, gamers! One of the things I said I was going to do this year is I was going to bring you along on the journey of concepting Weirdrun's newest game. So, one of the things I do first is I like to have a pretty solid idea of what type of game I'm going to be making. Whether that is a narrative game, a first-person shooter, a platformer, a management sim, what type of game. I do a lot of research on that. I do a lot of research about what's out in the market currently and where my game could be different. What is the point of difference? Otherwise, I'm just making something that's been made before. I don't want to do that. I want to make something new. Once I have that solidified in my head, the type of game that I want to make, I start looking at aesthetics. Lots of different indie developers will do this differently, but because I'm a concept artist predominantly, I like to start with the aesthetics and kind of move out from there because I sort of know what mechanics I want already, given that that will be based on what type of game I'm making. So one of the first things I do, and I tell my students to do this as well whenever starting any project, is I make a mood board. Now, lots of people do this in different ways. Some people have Pinterest boards, some people just have inspiration boards. I like to call it a mood board, and I like to set mine up a certain way to ensure success. Okay, here's an example of an Animal Crossing mood board for a new character. Originally, I used this to show my students. One of the things I wanted them to do is concept a brand new Animal Crossing character, and I wanted them to set up a mood board so that they could stay inspired and also keep their design really cohesive, not only to the original art style, but also to whatever they were trying to portray, whatever animal and whatever style. Now, I get that that's kind of a weird example, but one of the things I would say for you to do when you're starting out your game idea is get a couple of different references from games that are similar to the game you want to make and the art style that's similar, and then push them all together. So if you're making a platformer, grab some Mario references, grab some really successful games that do the thing you want to do successfully, then grab your art style. If you want to do the art style of, I don't know, Among Us, grab some references, put it all on one board. Now, it might not look cohesive at the time, but you're not trying to look cohesive. You're trying to visually represent an idea that is inside your head and show either your team or show investors or show whoever. This is visual communication. A mood board is a really great way to get all of your ideas down on one page without having to draw anything from scratch. Think of this as an inspiration board, as a jumping off point. This is going to help you visually to just get your ideas down on paper. It shouldn't take you too long. I never take more than like 25 minutes on a mood board, and I create multiple versions. I create a mood board per each character, I create an overall mood board, and I create a couple of different ones depending on what type of environments I need. Hopefully these tips help. I would love to see if you put any mood boards together yourself. Tag me and share. Hello gamers! So, you've figured out the type of game you want to make, and you've made a mood board / inspiration board. What's our next step? Well, our next step is to make some game design documents. There are a couple of different documents I like to make when I'm starting my games, but there are two that I think are really important. And if you're making a game for the first time, or if you want to streamline your workflow, these are two that are really, really good for you. So the first document I like to do has a couple of different names, but I like to do it first because it feeds into my bigger game design document, and some people call this the pillars of the game, some people call this idea generation, whatever. Like, I don't care what you want to call it. Start with a blank sheet and I want you to write down the core pillars of your game. So a couple of people do this a different way, but the way I like to do it is I like to put the main idea down. I like to put what experience I'm trying to provide. So idea is like a narrative, experience is how I want the player to feel. Is this a cozy game? Is this a scary game? What do I want them to experience while progressing through my game? Then the main goals of the game. So we've got narrative, experience, goals, and then normally I write down some mechanics that I'm interested in that I want the player to either have to use, or I write down more tech-based stuff in this area, like maybe what engine I'm going to use, how that's going to affect gameplay, if there's anything I need to think of, like which system I'm going to have it on, am I going to port it later to another system, things like that. So I've kind of got narrative down, experience down, the goals, and also mechanics and tech stuff. So for the actual GDD, I like to go into loads of depth and have multiple different pages. It's also a living document, so me and my team should be working on this constantly and it can get updated whenever, whereas the first one is kind of the original idea, so that kind of once it's done, I just leave it alone. The longer GDD should have a lot more detail in it. It should explain the story, the characters, the levels, environment design, art, gameplay, sound, any audio pieces that you want in there, user interface, accessibility, everything should go into the GDD. My GDDs also advance every time I make a game because I learn things from the previous time I made a game. So sometimes I figure out that certain stuff didn't work as well in the last game that I made, and so I make sure to put that in there. So like a lessons learned piece is normally in there for me, just so that I know where I want to improve on this next game. Basically, your GDD is going to be your Bible throughout your whole development process. It's something you can look back on. Yes, it can be worked on and changed, but your core idea is going to be there and you're going to have figured out a lot of stuff. If you want to see an example of one, let me know and I will give you like a blank template, and good luck if you make one. Good morning, gamers. So today I thought I would talk about what I usually do as my third step in the game development process. So if you've been following along with the tutorials so far, you'll have an inspiration board or a mood board, and you'll have a fully finalized game design document. So now that we have all of our documentation and our inspiration for our aesthetics, what do we do now? Well, we start prototyping. So normally what I do is I decide which engine I'm going to be working in. I predominantly am a Unity developer. It's just easier for me. It's the engine I'm most familiar with and the engine I prefer. That is not to say anything bad about Unreal. Unreal just does different things that I don't particularly need. I tend to make 2D games that have a lot of narrative focus, and so there's a lot of things with Unity that will allow me to do that quickly and easily. Let me know if you want me to go over the pros and cons of each of the engines, but this is a fundamental part of design, choosing your engine. Good luck! Hello game devs! So, step 4 of the development process. I kind of want to segue a little bit here because normally in step 4 I would start prototyping, but that's because I know what engine I am using to make my game, whereas you might not be convinced yet. It's really hard for indie developers to create a brand new engine. It takes a lot of resources, a lot of time, and a lot of programming knowledge, which not everybody might have. So there are 2 really great options already out there, and even massive studios use them. So let's talk about them, Unreal and Unity. Let's talk about Unity first, and the reason I want to talk about Unity first is because it's my preference. That is because of the type of games that I make and the language I code in. Unity uses C#, which I think has a much less steep learning curve. I find it much easier to show beginners C# over C++, which is what Unreal uses. Unity is fantastic for quick prototyping. I find greyboxing in Unity really easy, and I love adding in all my mechanics and maybe not having my art finalized, but at least having a demo that I can test. Now, bear in mind, the games that I make are normally 2D and narrative or art focused. They are not realistic looking. If you want a really great example of a game that was made with Unity, the Cuphead games are made in Unity. So 2D, really beautiful art style, but not photorealistic. Now let's talk about Unreal. Unreal has a much sharper learning curve for its language, but it has a lot of tools inside of the program that will allow you to do things really, really quickly. It also has a fantastic marketplace in which you can buy photorealistic assets and materials. A lot of people I know who are making 3D games always opt for Unreal, and that is purely because of the amount of things you can accomplish in Unreal in a short amount of time. Now, like I said, I think Unity is preferable for indie designers, especially seeing that it's easier to use and quicker to learn, meaning you can basically pump out a prototype pretty quickly. But if you're not artistically inclined and you would rather use other people's assets or pay for them, then Unreal is great. But do think about the art style that you want your game to be in, because if it's photorealistic, Unreal. If it's anything else, probably Unity, and that's just my opinion. Now, similarities. Both engines allow you to create for PC, mobile, and console, so don't worry about that. I tend to find the animation better in Unity, but they both have animation and they both use particle effects if you want them. And great news, they're also both free. What I suggest is go do some research about which engine you'd like the most, but honestly they're both great choices, and given that they're free and there is documentation online for you to learn, just get started.